was first asked about More Media holding a media summit, my mind very quickly turned to the old world mix of award shows and abundant socialising in glorious locations such as Cannes. However, I quickly came back to reality and the current COVID environment where it is difficult to offer any of those delights. So at More, we have now focused on providing you with a full programme of quality content. We are lucky to have accountants and other professionals from all over the world with detailed knowledge of all aspects of the media sector. We have further enhanced this by mixing in a cocktail of leading industry experts to give each of our sessions a unique perspective and focus. Our aim is to both inform and also to offer different insights and thinking on some of the key challenges for the year ahead. Our advertising group looked at the hot topics for 2022, from tokenization to the war for talent, with views from across 3 continents. The theatre panel was much more grounded in the ongoing issues facing the sector and how to survive COVID amid the constant disruption to production. In the world of film and TV, we assembled a wholly external group to consider how the industry is dealing with the challenges of ESG and whether change is coming quickly enough. Last but by no means least, we consider the emerging MarTech landscape with particular focus on the key themes to come out of the latest MarTech Alliance survey. I genuinely hope that each of you finds something of interest, and if you are sufficiently energized from the discussions, please do not hesitate to contact me directly after the summit. So now all that is left for me to do is formally to welcome you to the first More Media Summit, and now to pass you over to the capable hands of our speakers in the hope that maybe we will be able to do the next summit in a glorious location. Thank you and be well.
Okay, welcome to the Moore Kingston Smith Media Summit. This is the advertising panel, and I'm delighted to say we have great panelists today joining us. We have Evan Horowitz, who is the founder and CEO of Movers and Shakers, a great agency in the States. According to Adweek, in fact, it's the fastest growing marketing agency in the world. Its mission is simply to spread joy, so hopefully that's exactly what he'll do today. We also have Chloe Davis with us, who in September 2021 joined Lucky Generals as Head of Social Impact, with a focus on building a sustainable, diverse and inclusive company culture and output. It's an interesting role because you wouldn't have to track back too many years ago where such a role might have been viewed as maybe opaque. But today, it's absolutely germane. It's germane to Lucky Generals, and it should be germane to all businesses. So we're very lucky to have Chloe, and looking forward to her thoughts. Jen McCabe joins us from Armanino on the west coast of the US. It's a partner member of More North America. Jen's focus is on advertising in the media sector. She has self-styled savior of creativity and has led the women's advancement at Armanino. We're also joined by Matias Tejero, CEO of More Tejero in Argentina. Matias has had extensive experience in the advertising sector, particularly around the LATAM region, and we look forward to a perspective from that. And finally, we have Ian Graham, a partner in the media practice at Moore Kingston Smith in London. Ian has spent the last 20 years providing commercial and compliance advice to independent marketing services businesses in London. What Ian doesn't know about clients, no one else does. So we have a great array of input. I think I'd like to start. I mean, my background is advertising, so I'm going to start right in there and say that the foundations of advertising have always been, and possibly will always be, simply culture, talent, and capabilities. And by capabilities, I mean the marriage of available technology of the day with ideas born of a strategy. So culture, talent, and capabilities. And clearly, with so much going on in the world that I don't need to outline, the question I want to ask, and I want to start with Chloe, is simply this: what keeps you up at night?
Robert, that's not a small question. I think, I've always said that we are the storytellers. We are the people that get to visualize everyone's stories, and it's an honor and a privilege to do that. But I think that the last 24 months have really shown us which stories actually matter and how can we make sure that this is indicative and throughout our work, but that starts with our people. And so when we think about the diversity of people that we have in our business, where they come from, what does that represent and who they represent, it's all a little overwhelming. We've had so much happen in the world. I call it a panini because that's how my mental health would like to take it on. But we've been through a pandemic that's been a universal leveler. It's really made us introspective and think about who we are as people, who our businesses are, what are our values, and how do we make sure that that is reflected in the work. So we're really thinking about who we are and what represents us. And that starts, like you said, with our people. So where do our people come from? Are we as inclusive and diverse as we should be, now that we are more informed about what diversity and what inclusivity really looks like? And for me, that always starts with belonging. If you create a place where people truly feel like they belong, this is a place that celebrates difference. And within advertising, we're very good at doing that on the outside, but actually it's been a real opportunity in the last 24 months to look at internally, what does that look like? And we haven't always got that right. And I think that's really made for some very difficult conversations that require us to be vulnerable. And that's not something that I don't think we're always new to. So when you ask what makes me stay up at night, it's really about the work now. And we think about social change and that outside of the lights, it's about movement. It's about what's happening on the ground. It's about really making sure that the energy is shifting, that we're talking about the environment, that we're talking about things that matter to people, and that those people have an expectation that when we tell their stories through an advertising lens, that all of that is included and it's done authentically and transparently. And that means that you have to have that knowledge within your business. And so I think that's really a place of how do we do that, and how do we do that honestly, but also to do it well. And that requires education. So I feel like we have a big job to do, but there are so many of us that are now on this journey, and roles like mine will help because it brings in a point of difference. But I'm not the guru for everything. I'm a firm believer in community, and it's about how does my role span and share best practice with somebody else, so that this knowledge is coming through into our industry in a way that it was never fully funneled and tapped into. It was always kind of something that you consulted on, but now it's actually foundational. And this foundational work will then impact everything else that we do.
That's fascinating. I love the idea of the need of belonging and work that stories that actually matter, and acknowledging vulnerabilities, and reflecting movements through the work. And you use two words there, which take me on to the next question of authentically and transparently, which moves me seamlessly. Evan, I would like to ask you a question. So movers and shakers are considered, as I understand it, to be the lead in the industry lead in the use of and working with TikTok and TikTok marketing. I think you've had over 150 billion views amassed over 3 years, if I've got my numbers correct. So in that context, with that expertise, and given what Chloe's just said, and the need for authenticity and transparency and movements, how do you think the role of TikTok will evolve in 2022?
Yeah, well, it certainly has become a dominant force in the industry, almost out of nowhere. It's crazy to watch. A few trends that we're watching this year as TikTok continues to grow and evolve. First, I just pick up on Chloe's point about storytelling and whose stories we're telling. TikTok has had a representation problem that they're continuing to work on, and all of us who work in and around the platform continue to support that, making sure that we're elevating diverse voices, and giving exposure to people of all different types of backgrounds. So that's something that I think is going to continue to be a focus, at least for movers and shakers and for many other players in TikTok. Other trends that we're seeing on the platform, really continued evolution from where it started for marketers, which was very upper funnel, to lower funnel, which has been what a lot of us have been asking for a long time. TikTok has always been a great place to get your brand exposed, to build buzz around the brand, from more of an upper funnel perspective. And over the last year, they've added a lot of new features focused on e-commerce, and live shopping is finally starting to roll out in a bigger way. So that's very exciting, I think, for brands that are looking to actually be able to drive some conversion through the platform more than ever before. So that's going to continue. And the last thing I would say just about where TikTok is headed is it's pulling the industry along with it. I think we all see there's a bit of a whirlwind around TikTok with other platforms trying to figure out how they can catch up. It's having a very profound effect on Instagram, for example, with Instagram's push to authenticity, as you said, Robert, also to more video content. So as TikTok evolves, we see it pulling the rest of the landscape too, and that's pretty exciting. It's definitely shaking things up.
Yeah, that does sound exciting. I won't ask you to comment on some of the other platforms, you might get in trouble. But if we're picking...
Fantastic, we love them all.
Yeah, absolutely awesome. Jen, if I can turn to you, and there's quite a few areas we've touched on there, and you spend your time advising Evan and many other clients. I mean, what is keeping you up at night, if I may ask?
Evan and Chloe are keeping me up at night. Well, I watch what Evan and his teams are doing. I think it's fascinating that Movers and Shakers is actually putting on webinars to teach other ad agencies how to use TikTok. To me, that's just crazy that first of all, that he would do it and give away his secret stuff. So of course, as his advisor, I'm like, don't do it. And I look at TikTok and I try to understand it. So what keeps me up at night is trying to keep up, period. So I find myself going down the rabbit hole of TikTok, looking for brands that are advertising on it to see how they're doing it. One of the things that's making me nutty is the evolution of blockchain technology and cryptocurrency usage in our industry. If I were a media strategist and a media buyer and someone gave me a media budget and said, Jen, go out and spread this brand around, I think in 2022, it's going to be critical that our media people, our budgeting people, understand the value of cryptocurrency because certain advertisers are starting to accept it. Interestingly, last year, they wouldn't accept it because it was too volatile. In fact, some advertising channels wouldn't even allow crypto advertising on their medium because it was almost like advertising a drug, almost like it should have been monitored. Well, now we're going to have to figure out what it's worth and how we spread that around. I saw that Time Magazine is making their cover page an NFT now, and they're accepting crypto to pay for subscriptions. It is coming. We can't just have media buyers, strategists, planners like we used to. We have to have people who are experts in crypto. And since I'm in accounting, like Ian, it means I got to figure out how to count it. I've got to figure out the debits and credits in crypto. So that makes me quite nervous. It's coming at us very, very fast. When Chloe talks about ESG, I worry about, I have hundreds of agencies that I work with. Some of them are already leading culture. My advertising agencies lead cultural charges. Our politicians are not. Business has to lead the charge, and their advertisers help businesses lead the charge. So if agencies aren't on the bandwagon with ESG, they're losing out. In 2022, if they don't have B Corp status or an ESG strategy, they will be left behind. It's table stakes at this point because of what Chloe said the last 2 years. It's critical now. So I worry that my little agencies who aren't thinking about it, or big agencies that have maybe older founders, don't understand that they have to get on it right now.
Right now. Matthias, are you feeling that same anxiety from a LATAM perspective?
Yes, the issues are quite similar. Maybe in the race for talent, agencies in the region have a great challenge competing with lower budget and are facing a new issue for them as companies from other countries are hiring creatives and talented professionals directly, not the agencies as they used to be. So it is getting harder every day to find new talent, and they fight back searching for professionals far from their office too, and opening branches in other markets to get new business there. And as Shen said, it's not enough to find creative people. They need to be adaptable to constant changes and unstable environments. Here in Latin America, we all have a PhD in an unstable environment, but it's not enough. adapt. People need to be able to understand the new trends, to be ahead of them, the language of TikTok or metaverse, and at the same time of knowing how to use blockchain when trading, for example. But it is not easy to compete for talent with lower budgets. So as you are going to stress your cash flow in that race, it's key to try to keep your KPIs in order as much as possible, not to end with other issues or not being able then to cover your operational cost.
You make a great point there, Matthias. You mentioned the importance of the impact on talent. And that was one of the foundations I referenced up front about what constitutes advertising. And you've all mentioned it. But when you start thinking about the need to understand NFTs, blockchain, crypto, the need to understand the latest the revolution in social platforms and what's in and what's not in and how best to use it. And frankly, just how to treat people to keep them inspired and loyal and bring their A game. So my question, I'm going back to you actually, Evan. You're the fastest growing agency reportedly in the world. So you're hiring a lot, I imagine. How tough is that then? There must be a big talent challenge for you.
Actually, with the Great Resignation and the crazy imbalance between supply and demand in our industry, it seems like every agency is trying to hire a lot right now. So it is a big challenge. For us, the best way that we found is to just differentiate through our culture. We have a really unique approach to the culture that we create. As you mentioned earlier, Robert, our mission is to spread joy, and that's very attractive to a lot of talent. That permeates through the way that we work. So I think we've really succeeded in building a uniquely collaborative and constructive environment. And it also affects the work that we put out there. We're very selective about the clients that we accept, the brands that we'll represent. That's something that's very attractive to talent. The fact that we've turned away a lot of clients who don't match our values and what we're trying to put in the world, and that we let clients go when it's not a good fit. Maybe the brand is a good representation of what we're doing, but the way that particular client team works isn't joyful and positive. And so we do let a number of clients go when things don't work out. And as a result of those things, I think people feel the difference here. I'm new to the industry myself. This is the first time I've ever worked at or in an agency. So just a little bit figuring out as I go along. But I do hear from the team that joy, positivity, collaboration is not necessarily common in our industry. So I'm excited to be doing things a little bit differently, I hope.
Chloe, I'd love to hear what you have to say about
that. Evan, like you, I'm new, and it's been a baptism of fire in advertising, which, strangely enough, I understand completely. But I kind of wanted to jump off of one of the things that you said, which is collaboration. Collaboration is key. Inherently in people, we connect, we find community. And so this importance that comes through our work in advertising, but also the internet has guaranteed that we are so informed now on who is good, who is bad, who's got some messiness, that actually we can't afford to, as advertisers, align ourselves with people whose values don't match who we are representing outside. And when you said, it's making that decision to stay with people, actually to let people go and have that value inherently in the work, that's been one of the biggest things that's come out of the last 2 years. Who is really reflective of, they might be an amazing organization, but actually how they treat the people inside isn't necessarily the right thing, or there's been histories of, client cases. And so when you do this work, even if you do the amazing work, actually does that undervalue what we are creating as advertisers? And it comes back to that bit that I said, it's the responsibility part of, we can't just make the nice, pretty things. Actually, value is inherent in everything that we do. And so it's about how are we actually making sure that the work that we do has value for the stories that we're telling, because that's the thing that people will pick up with, and that's how brands become bigger and better. But I kind of throw it back to the first thing that I was laughing at. Isn't it about time that we had a little bit of disruption and a little bit of change? I think that's that uncomfortable place that we're in the most, is that it's been like, Jen mentioned before, sometimes it's been the same set of voices who have been in the highest positions, determining and being the voice of everybody else. And sometimes they're not as well informed as they might believe, and they're telling stories on behalf of other people and not telling the right stories. So the more that we will have difference within our industry, new perspectives, and Jen, in the pre-briefing, you were saying, I'm a woman at this highest level, but actually in this role, like, that's keeping me up at night too. Like, when we have to be visible, but also the representation that comes with it too. The more that we have other Jens within our industry, the easier that it gets, but also the more different and more beautiful, because we're all going to have a different perspective that makes our industry more rich. And that's how we continue to make more better creative work, because it's diversity of thought.
Which is really the ultimate point of the whole industry. Better ideas to grow our clients' business. And you brought up a great point there, the collision or the partnership of values and value. A truth of advertising should be that an agency's values will ultimately determine its value. And this plays to a lot of the conversation. So I want to pull focus again and say we have social impact, we have the role of technology, we have the talent challenge, all of these coming together. Ian, from your vast experience of dealing with is this in tune with what you've experienced?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely. I think you've left it quite broad there, Robert. So maybe I'll just like focus in on one of them. But the talent issues in particular. I mean, a few of the panelists have touched on, the need for agencies to kind of live and breathe what they're selling to brands for that authenticity. But actually, I think what is, and 100% agree with that. I think what is really interesting is how that impacts on, the ability to attract and retain talent, because ultimately that is the core of any successful agency, right? You can't name any successful agency over the last 20 or 30 years that isn't absolutely chock full of incredible talent. And Chloe, actually, you touched on something earlier, which I think was really interesting, where you said people doing like your role is still a point of difference in that respect, which for me, I think that's quite interesting. Is that where we are as a sector at the moment, where that is still a positive point of difference? And how long does that last before just the lack of having somebody in your role and making sure that diversity and inclusion is being authentically lived in agency land, not being lip service to? How long is it before that isn't a positive point of difference, but merely the absence of it is a massive negative point of difference? And at that point, and already surely, the impact that has on the ability of those agencies not only to be taken seriously by their clients, but to be taken seriously by their potential talent and their existing talent, because that seems to me to be, potentially an existential threat for agencies that can't get that right. And there's always, a battle for good talent has always been there in this sector, but is this the ground that it's being fought on now, or is it something different? I think for me that's what's quite interesting at the moment, Robert. But certainly everything, and that's central to everything that we've talked about already.
Yeah, thank you. And I think there's a lot of commonalities there. I'm gonna close with a very, very simple question to each of you. Is the advertising industry an industry in crisis or an industry in flux?
I think that if advertising agencies are to survive and be creative, which means being on the edge all the time, thinking of the newest thoughts, that you should be in a state of flux, or we at Armanino call it VUCA, which is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. If you don't live like that in the agency world already, you're stale. So we should grab onto it and lead the charge at every turning.
Very good. Chloe, crisis or flux?
I was hoping that you'd go to one of the others first. I would say that we're in a flux, but that we just need to lean in a little bit. I think, to answer Ian, we're doing too much as a reaction and not being proactive. We're in a place where, when we started talking, I mean, everyone will agree, when we started talking about diversity and inclusion, suddenly everyone had a diversity and inclusion specialist, but were they actually qualified? So, I mean, I'm qualified for my role. I went through a very, robust recruitment, but it's to make sure that when we create these roles and we're actually thinking about these changes, that the world is changing, that we have the right people to do that, and that we make space for that, and we don't just get these people box tick and then try to carry on as we've always been. So absolutely flux, it's newness, but that comes with it an element of education, and we all have to keep doing that. No one is ever finished. So I think the industry needs to remember that we're not finished. There's actually so much more, but we also have to do a bit of leaning in and a bit of education with that too. And that's how we'll be great.
Cool. Matthias, are we in crisis or in flux in Latin America?
I think in crisis, but meaning for crisis and opportunity, something that is evolving with new environment, a change in culture and behaviors as never had happened in decades. A crisis for good to shake the roots, new ways and languages for advertising and marketing communications, new media and new available technology. For the ones that are preparing themselves and are keen to embrace the change, I am really optimistic about the times to come in media and advertising.
Optimistic crisis. Evan, you have the last word. What's your prognosis?
Well, as a newcomer to the industry, it's hard for me to say that there's a crisis. From my perspective, things are going great, but I think it's telling that the fastest growing agency right now is founded by two people who have no agency experience. So certainly there's clearly flux going on, and I'm not sure if that amounts broadly enough to a crisis, but if I was at one of the big traditional agencies, I would probably be feeling some crisis.
It's going to be a crisis for some people that don't get this right. That's for sure.
Yeah.
It's like, a comet was a crisis for the dinosaurs and an opportunity for plenty of other things.
Oh, it is. It's also, it's not just finding talent; it's losing the non-talent, and it's a crisis for the non-talent.
And everybody knows, when someone goes from one place to another place, you know why, and then it's kind of like fighting against that. And I think that, we're much smaller than I think people think that we are.
It's
and everybody
a very
talks.
small world, Chloe.
Yeah.
Everybody
I always
talks.
say in LA, if you don't know me, you don't know anybody.
But it's
Great.
exciting. It is exciting, and I like the little mic drop, Evan. Cute. But it is. It's you are only as good as the people at the top, and I think everyone's really thinking about what does that look like for them now in a way that they never had to. Because if the work was good and you kept getting the work, you never really had to think about yourself. You just put it out. And now that matters just as much as what you put out. So, for some people, it really is a crisis. And for others, it's, because you think with a flux mentality, that's how you carry on winning.
It's quite a what have you done for me lately sector as well. So if being great 5 years ago is not gonna help you very much now. I think that's what makes it quite exciting. Terrifying maybe is a better word. I don't know.
Thank you very, very much. I mean, I'd like, it's an industry I worked in for 30 years. I have great heart for it. I love ideas, and I love the collisions that you're required to make the ideas, but you have to do it as a team. You have to have a family principle. You have to keep an eye on you. All you have is people. All you have is talent. And you take your eye off that for a second, and it's a house of cards. And so I wish you all the very, very best of luck with this. I really hope you turn that flux into opportunity. And thank you for taking part.
Thank you, Robert.
Thanks, Rob.
Many thanks for joining us today for our discussion around the return of theatre and some of the key themes that we see going forward. I'm Mark Chimampofo, so Head of Theatre at Moore Kingston Smith, and I'm joined today by a fantastic and very knowledgeable panel who are going to share their thoughts with you. First of all, we've got Neil Edelman, theatre lawyer from Harbottle and Lewis, who's very well known in the UK and in Broadway for his work right the way across the sector. So that ranges from working with producers, theatre owners, rights holders, the whole piece. Secondly, we've got Craig Manzino. He is head of the media and entertainment practice in New York at Armanino. He specialises personally in working with entertainment industry talent, so the people who are so central to the success of our industry. Finally, we've got Chris Mori, who's a general manager at 101 Productions, very successful GM and executive producer firm working on a number of fantastic productions, including Dear Evan Hansen. And Chris personally oversees that show on Broadway in New York, and there's also a US tour, so very busy. So thank you all for being with us today. Chris, if you don't mind, I'll start with you. Hopefully, we've ridden out the storm, and I know you successfully reopened Dear Evan Hansen both in the States and in London. Now, you know, the two countries took very different approaches to supporting their industry over the last couple of years. In the UK, it was primarily support to employers, and there's been some targeted grants that people are able to apply for with the use of supporting their return or continued running. In the US, payments to individuals rather than employers, and a much more guaranteed support to producers. And certainly on the face of it, we look at that enviously from the UK through the Save Our Stages grants. I think it'd be interesting to hear how that has either helped or hindered your return, and I guess really how you've found it.
Well, in the U.S., the assistance that came from the government was less targeted than it seems to have been in the UK, and that has turned out to be an enormous help. The government provided the Save Our Stages grants. It became known as the Shuttered Venue Operator grants. They were grants that were up to $20 million per production based on expense projections over the next year. That allowed the U.S. productions to know for certain that they could reopen. Whereas in the UK, those targeted grants were based more on need, as I understand them, and maybe Neil or Craig would be able to know more about that. But most West End productions that I'm aware of either didn't qualify or didn't apply, and therefore the businesses didn't get as much assistance from the government.
Yeah, and I mean, our Save Our Stages, the Shuttered Venue Operating Grant was one piece of it. I think the other piece of it, you know, that I saw very closely was the PPP loans, which was going directly to the individuals, as Mark was sort of referring to, and the small businesses that weren't necessarily selling live tickets. And it was quite amazing to see how, and I'm sure with all government programs, when they're throwing billions of dollars, you know, in a few weeks into the market, there's always going to be some issues, you know, and there was some pushback on some people that got it, but I really watched it save some people's businesses, as well as keep, you know, the talent kind of alive with the help through the unemployment as well. The one thing I did note with the SVOG in the US was by the time it came out and you were getting the money, you were sort of getting it after the fact, and it was really for expenses you incurred sort of prior to getting the money in a way, Chris. And a lot of the shows weren't open and operating during that period of time. So it was, you sort of were getting money after the fact for for expenses you incurred. And there is a time frame going forward you could use it, but the timing of getting the money versus when you were supposed to spend it was definitely challenging to sort of traverse, since Broadway was closed during the time that they were supposed to be spending the money.
Yeah, that's true. It was certainly a cash flow issue at the very beginning, but you knew the money was coming. Like, you knew it was coming, and that allowed you to proceed with a confidence that, that on the UK side, it seems like producers didn't have. So it is true that, looking at the challenges of that money, is that it then became known as you began to negotiate all your settlements to get through and to reopen. Everybody knew you had this grant money. So the conversations are just different when you have been the recipient of a large grant and many other businesses haven't. So that made those conversations a bit more complicated, but just knowing that that money was coming really made such a huge difference.
I think there's certainly what I've seen is an interesting dynamic across the last 2 years, where it felt like in the early days of the pandemic, UK producers, because of the furlough scheme we had in the UK, were in a position to support their companies quite significantly and be able to keep people on the payroll because there was government money funding them and funding them being able to furlough company members. I think, though, when SVOG came through, it was an absolute game changer that we didn't see in the UK and has made a material difference. I think there's going to be an interesting exercise, though, looking back in the future at the sort of two respective markets and the outcome of it all, because it's feeling slightly ironic at the moment that despite the much higher levels of SVOG support, because of some of the differing dynamics of Broadway, we're at a point as we're starting into 2022 where shows on Broadway are falling left, right, and centre, whereas many shows in the West End have managed to make it through one way or another. And certainly at the moment, there aren't any sort of significant numbers of what I would call COVID casualty shows in the West End. So I think it'll be interesting when people look back in future years and try and assess the sort of respective sports in both countries as to which ended up having the ultimately more beneficial effect.
That's an interesting point, Neil. The SVOG grants certainly allowed us to reopen. It made sure that producers started out after the pandemic in no worse a situation than when they started it. But even though $10 million is a lot of money, you still have to go forward and you still have to reopen and operate in a pandemic. And when the grants were announced, when the Broadway industry was discussing reopening later in the year, there seemed to be a general belief that the pandemic would be behind us a little bit, and that going forward we'd be, the reopening and having a little bit of a reserve as you go in, as you started operating again while you rebuild your audience. We didn't expect the Omicron variant and the devastating impact that has had in December over the holidays and now into the winter. And that is a factor that, maybe audiences in the UK might be weathering that a bit better than US audiences on Broadway may have so far.
Right. And also the US audience for Broadway is largely tourists and foreign tourists, which, we're definitely seeing, a great decline in that. I mean, foreign especially, you weren't even allowed in the country at some points. So I think it's partially the grants, but partially just how the countries handled the virus.
I think it does also throw into sharp contrast, though, how much more generally the West End is a marginal business, more so than Broadway. So costs are proportionately lower in the West End. It is the margin that producers need to take. I think any producer at the moment is simply going, can we survive week to week? No one's looking at making profits. They're going simply, are our costs covered each week? And it is marginally easier to do that in the West End than it is on Broadway, where where just the magnitudes are so much higher.
And Chris, something we've talked about was it, in a way, it almost opened the door for the shows that were showing up on Broadway. We were seeing sort of smaller plays finding theaters, which, usually, we only have 41 theaters, so space is usually a problem. And we found some smaller plays finding homes, probably because they were geared towards a more local audience as opposed to a tour bus type show. So it's just interesting to see that impact, and then we'll just have to see how that plays out going forward.
Exactly right. I would agree that would be one of the upsides of theater availability at that time. And as you say, we'll see how it unfolds going forward.
I mean, certainly availability of theatres, at least in London, has been one of the critical issues for a long time. But by and large, most of the large shows have come back and have reoccupied their original theatres, I think, in London. But I mean, turning to, I suppose, thinking about the audience, you mentioned the audience there, Chris. I mean, people are coming to see shows, which is fantastic news. But I think certainly one thing that we've seen in the UK is that the way in which people are buying tickets has changed. People aren't buying tickets months and months in advance. People are tending to buy them much later on. So producers are looking at much smaller advances and are really waiting on those individuals buying a ticket the week before or even on the week or the night. Is that similar in the States, or is that different?
No, it's a very similar in the US. After the pandemic, the Broadway League stopped reporting individual grosses, so there used to be more public data available as to what each show was doing. So that no longer exists. So it's not quite as hard to quantify, but just a couple of weeks ago, in making a presentation to the unions, the league collected sales data and advanced sales data from a number of shows, and the contrast between advanced sales this time of year 2 years ago versus now was stark. I mean, even the unions seem to be taken aback by the difference in advanced sales between then and now.
And also, I think we were seeing decent percentages of tickets sold, but it was the average ticket price was a lot less, and so there definitely was, discounting and, things like that at play. But it was also, I think one of the other issues was because of the quarantining rules, people were afraid to be out and test positive. I don't think it was that they were afraid to go to a theater, but if they did test positive and then they had a quarantine for 10 days, you couldn't go to work depending on what your job was, or you couldn't go see your family for Christmas because you tested positive. And so I think it wasn't that people were afraid to go to the theater or didn't want to buy the tickets. It was more of this quarantining rules. And we're really seeing that relax tremendously.
It's interesting that you say that about the mask mandate, because one of the big areas of debate over here in the UK has been about masks in theatres, where there was, until Omicron arrived, mask wearing was not compulsory, was optional, and theatre owners were sort of encouraging people but not compelling people. And there was a lot of sort of commentary within the industry as to whether it would be better to try and compel people because it would make some people feel more comfortable, or whether there were negative effects to that. And that was a big area of debate. And I suspect that we'll be heading back into that here with the sort of compulsory mask mandate dropping, as to the extent to which theatre owners should continue to try and compel people to wear masks.
Do you think the mask mandate hurts audiences, or do you think it helps? Like without the mask, will more people choose to go because it's less of an inconvenience, or will it keep other people away, or both?
I guess it partly depends on your demographic, doesn't it? And the demographic of different shows, because certainly anecdotally, it is an older audience member or an audience member who feels more vulnerable, who feels more comfortable with a mask on. And it is a younger audience member who may say, I don't want to have to sit there for 3 hours with a mask on. Actually, I'm going to go and do something else. And obviously the reality is that there are a lot of shows that do skew towards older audiences.
Yeah, we also had the issue originally where, children, people under 12 couldn't get the vaccination, and you have shows like Lion King, which relies on a younger audience, so, and now I believe starting next month, they will require a vaccination, on Broadway for children over 5 years old. So, there's just a lot of things at play here, and but currently, Chris, I think we're at 50% capacity on Broadway right now. Is that true?
The last number I saw was 61%, but that could have been 2 weeks ago and not the most recent. But that's about right. That's, it was in the fall, the numbers were in the 80s.
I mean, circling back a little bit, Chris, to reopening those shows, and also touching on some of the ways in which government supported people during the pandemic. I mean, the theatres were closed for a long time, and we have a big pool of people, both here and in the US, who are dependent on theatre traditionally for their work, and certainly. Anecdotally, there were stories of the freelancers, whether they're actors, costumers, whatever, taking temporary jobs, stacking shelves or whatever to make ends meet, and then later looking at other industries where they could use their skills, in particular film and TV, which emerged from the pandemic earlier than we did. In practice, was that a challenge for you, Chris? And I know, Craig, you work with a lot of these people. Have you seen people refocus outside theatre?
I believe most people came back to work when their shows reopened. There were definitely people who needed to do other things to make a living, so they pivoted. Broadway is always losing people to film and TV. It just pays better. And in recent years, there's been more production in New York, so there is more work in New York in other entertainment industries than just theater. But there were people who couldn't afford their New York apartments any longer, so they moved out and they moved on. And many have come back, most have come back, but certainly not all. It's just, the hiatus gave people a chance to reflect on what they wanted to do, what was important to them, and some of them thought the challenges of living in New York City and trying to make a living in the theater industry was too difficult, and so they are doing other things.
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that. I've been preparing taxes for people on Broadway for 20 years, and so I've watched a sort of how this changes and what people do, and we always have the people who sort of throw in the towel at some point because New York's hard. And I definitely think this was one of those years, or 2 years ago was definitely one of those years where a lot of people sort of threw in the towel. And I agree, the pivot to film and TV has always been attractive, and it just was more attractive. We also saw more people, getting into voiceover work, but we definitely did have initially a lot of people moving. There was a lot of people moving to California or just moving elsewhere, knowing, especially, or down to like closer to Atlanta where a lot of TV is being made. But knowing that auditions became virtual and probably will stay that way to some extent. So people were not as concerned about needing to be in New York for the auditions. So we're definitely seeing more people expecting to be able to audition virtually, and if they get a job, they'll come back. But there definitely was that, initial exodus. But I definitely, have seen a change where, people have said to me, I think I'm going to move back to New York. I know I'll be working in theater again, and that's very encouraging. And I think there's that draw of live theater that these people can't get out of their bones, and that's here to stay. And and that's why we're all in this business. It's something we're passionate about, and same with the actors. But definitely the government money was substantial. I mean, the unemployment was $1,000 a week, which that's more than some people were making working before. So that was very helpful, as well as the PPP money for the small business people, like the freelancers who used to operate on 1099. And they even opened up unemployment to freelancers for the first time, in my professional career, where people who weren't employees of shows or other businesses were able to collect unemployment, even though they were freelancer, which that's, like I said, never has happened before. So there was definitely the government intervention was massive. And I've always told my clients, government help, that, the unemployment is one of the only ways the government still supports the arts in the States. So go get it.
And in the UK, actors and musicians are considered freelancers and are not eligible for assistance. They were not eligible for the furlough scheme as well. So that was another difference between the two countries in the way they offered assistance to the people hurting during the pandemic.
Yeah, we had quite a big issue here, and there was a lot of industry focus on the lack of support for freelancers. That there was alongside the furlough scheme, there was a freelancer support scheme here, a parallel scheme. However, that had quite tight criteria on it, which meant that quite a number of people working in the theatre industry fell outside it and were not able to claim. And it's certainly at the moment, anecdotally, there is concern in the UK that we are heading towards a potential skill shortage in the industry. We've got a burgeoning film and TV industry, which is growing apace in London, and there are a lot of stories of, particularly in technical departments, people getting out of theatre and moving into film and TV, and it becoming much more challenging for producers to fill roles in technical departments.
And Neil, you tend to get involved in projects at quite an early stage. Is there the work for those people in theatre? What's the pipeline looking like?
I mean, the great thing is the pipeline is looking very reassuring. There are one of the sort of things that I found positively surprising during the pandemic is the number of producers who kept their development programs going, who were still developing, who were still commissioning, who were still, as soon as they could, workshopping new shows. And certainly at the moment, I mean, you alluded, Mark, to the fact that there is yet again a queue of people waiting for West End theatres. And I guess that is testament to the fact that we've got a number of shows that are on a later timeline than they'd anticipated. So it's almost like we've got a sort of 2-year backlog of shows waiting for theatres. But coming behind them, there is still, it feels, a very strong pipeline of new shows coming forward. So that's the positive bit of news, is that hopefully there's some great stuff yet to come.
And I just want to add, the union in the US, I mean, only like 10% of the people in Actors Equity are working at any given week anyway. So this idea of being unemployed, it didn't really scare the actors as much. They're used to this sort of ebb and flow. This was obviously a major one, but this has been a problem in the industry for a very long time. How do these people make ends meet in between? So this was just sort of a longer example of that, but we definitely, I think, these people are very resilient and they know how to pivot. And they're here to come back strong. And I think people are very excited about it. And I agree, the pipeline we're seeing, I talk to producers, with projects, and they're like, my plate is full. I can't even look at another project. So I think we're ready for a big, strong return.
And sticking with that positive theme, that pipeline going forward, and resilience and ability to bounce back. I mean, we've all had to adapt to sets of circumstances we weren't expecting, and I think in many ways lots of positives have come out of that as well as negatives. I suppose a question to each of you. I mean, do you think there are any sort of enduring lessons that the industry will take out of the last 2 years and sort of run with going forward?
I hope so. I mean, I feel like it's a little premature to say what what's enduring. We're, in New York, we're still in the Omicron phase of the pandemic. So, as we mentioned earlier, there was certainly some reason for optimism because we saw new plays, we saw new voices being presented on Broadway, which is a great development. It remains to be seen whether that will continue to be the case. Unfortunately, these shows opened up during the Omicron surge, so it was not the same even playing field economically as when other plays new open, which is already a challenge. So we hope that's an enduring element that goes forward. There's been a call for some reexamination of the employer-employee relationship. It seems a lot of shows are making positive steps in that direction. It's an ongoing, evolving situation, but hopefully those efforts will continue. We will see. And I'm just seeing more kindness. I'm seeing more compassion just from management, just between people, because everyone's so grateful to be back working again. Everyone's endured enormous difficulties over the last time, and everyone's very happy that our industry is coming back. And those are positives. Coming out of a pandemic, it's very easy to be compassionate to other people and to understand what they've all been through. And I hope that continues so that it doesn't take more pandemics for us to keep interacting in this way.
I think the other thing the next pandemic is not going to be the same. That's one thing I think we need to kind of keep in mind, that it might not be a virus that shuts us down next time. It could be something different, which needs a whole different set of solutions. So, what I'm sort of encouraging people or, talking about a lot is, we don't want to now shore up how do we prevent a virus from shutting us down, because it's not going to be a virus. It could be something totally different. So we really need to be very anti-fragile and really flexible in our thinking and our ability to recognize something, come together, work on solutions. And we can't try to prevent, we shouldn't try to now retrofit everything to prevent the next virus, because it might not be a virus. So I just think that that's what we have to recognize, that it'll always be something different. And it's just going to be about coming together, being a community, supporting each other, and finding these solutions. And that's hopefully something we've learned.
I think the only thing I would add on to that is that also, I think we're certainly seeing in the West and in the UK a greater willingness to question regular ways of doing things. So things that have been the same for 10, 20, 30 years, people are much more prepared to look again and how shows are produced, performance schedules, as Chris was alluding to, labor relations. And I think that then there hopefully will be some longer term good that comes out of that, and out of people sort of examining how the industry works, and whether there are bits of the industry and aspects of the industry that could work more effectively.
Yeah, one of those is definitely going to be the streaming of live theater. I know it's something we've been afraid of. The Met Opera does a very successful job at it. There's definitely issues with it, and there's nothing like being live in the theater. But I think we're now more open to it, and we're going to be more open to other ideas and other revenue streams, which hopefully will keep the industry as a whole, stronger.
I think that's fantastic. I think that sense of community and openness to change, I think, will certainly put us in a very good place going forward. And I think that's a fantastic place to end our discussion today. Really, really interesting to hear from all of you. I'm sure our viewers will think the same, and much food for thought. So thank you very much for joining me, and indeed for being so generous with your thoughts, and also thanks to everyone else who joined us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Neil. Thanks, Rick.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a session where we're going to be talking about diversity in 2022. It remains perhaps the most important issue that we can be discussing. And I am delighted to be joined today by Steve Davis of the APA, by Sophie Gold, who is the founder and owner of Eleanor in the United States, by Kirsten Emhoff, who is the owner and CEO of, or the founder and CEO, to get it strictly right, of Pretty Bird, and by Mike Figgis, who is an acclaimed film director, twice nominated for Leaving Las Vegas, I believe. So thank you all for joining me today. Let's get straight into it. So the first question, Kirsten, let me put this to you. It's 6 years since the foundation of Free the Bid, and in that time, because of various incidents, we've seen a number of initiatives. Do you feel that we have made progress, and what more do you feel we must be doing in order to improve the situation?
I feel like we've made some progress by just having organizations like Free the Bid, Bid Black, Change the Lens, raise awareness and start to gather filmmakers and give them a platform for their work and opportunities. I think that the industry has not fully made a commitment to diversifying our industry. And so what we see happening is you get a lot of people saying, oh, make sure that there's a woman in the bid pool. Make sure there's a woman and a person of color in the bid pool. But then when it comes time to awarding the job, what we hear frequently is, well, that person doesn't have the track record to actually get the job. So it seems like there's a lot of box checking and not enough full commitment to giving people opportunities.
And just based on your own experience, Pretty Bird, I would venture to suggest has a good track record here. You've got a very diverse roster of directors. Have you noticed a change in terms of it being easier to win work for female and non-white directors? Has it remained roughly the same? What's been your experience over the last few years?
I mean, we've had a commitment to building diverse creators since we were founded when I started it in 13 years ago. So I feel like we've been one of the early companies that was pounding on everyone's door, trying to get opportunities for these filmmakers, and had a lot of success with directors like my partner, Paul Hunter, Melina Matsoukas. So it's been a struggle, but we've found success with it. Now, I think, yeah, there's more awareness of it. But like I said, it's still the situation where we're bidding a ton of jobs with directors of color and female directors, but the percentage of the directors that are actually getting the jobs is quite low.
Well, let's bring Sophie in at this point. Sophie, you're obviously in a very similar position, and what would you describe as your experience of dealing with this specific issue of trying to win work, get people in the room, and so on in the last couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, just it's the same really. I mean, it's a lot of box checking. I recently had a project where we bid on it, and just after we got the email that we didn't get the project, we were sent a questionnaire to fill out that this particular agency had bid, diversely, which I felt was quite offensive. And I did not fill out the questionnaire. But it feels that this industry does very well at performative diversity, in terms of, we saw, this year's Super Bowl where, I've never seen so many Black people in front of the camera. It was just like, go out there and grab a Black person. But in terms of who actually directed these spots, I think it was the diversity was like less than 5 of the directors were people of color and female. And we're going to see the same thing happen with this year's Super Bowl coming up. As I've done my research, it's the same thing. The same people are directing it because they are seen as safe. and I have said this all up and down town, is that we cannot continue to play this like match game. If they have it on the reel, then they can do it. We really have to go back to recognizing talent and how our industry really flourished, 10, 20 years ago when all of these directors came up. They didn't have much. A lot of them had skateboard films and whatever else on their reels, but they were given the opportunity to be creative, and that, launched their careers. So it's extremely difficult, and we won't even talk about the cost factor of what it is, as an owner of a production company to continue, bid on projects and only to not get them or not get a large amount of them, but yet we're still having to deal with, the cost of bidding. So it's a struggle.
Steve, let me bring you in at this point. The APA must be aware of what's just been spoken. Obviously, for Kirsten and Sophie, their experiences in the United States, but I think it's a pretty similar picture in London. That there does seem to be a great deal of, to use Sophie's word, performative inclusion in terms of bids. Have people drawn your attention to this as head of the trade association? And what action do you think? I mean, I remember, Steve, when we were together at the launch event for Free the Bid in London, and you made a comparison with, the black coaches in the NFL, and how, it took a long time for the sort of positive discrimination or affirmative action, whatever your preferred coinage is, for that to yield results. But it does feel from where I'm sat as though we really are going backwards, frankly. There doesn't seem to be any progress. What's the APA's position on this? What do you think? What more can be done?
Well, I think a huge amount more can be done. We have a 7-point plan for improving diversity, but it could be a 100-point plan for improving diversity, and it all requires a huge amount of work. And I think we'll be talking about this in 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years, because this goes to the whole concept of inequality in society, social class, and many, many things. That we're not going to fix those, but we should be improving them. And I think our challenge is, I think we have to improve them year on year, but also accept that we're not going to fix them entirely. And so we should not be complacent about progress and say this is good enough, but neither should we despair and say it's not equal yet, we're not making any progress. We've got to hit somewhere between those points and continue to make progress every year. But I see lots of complexities just on the director issue, which is one of the many issues we could discuss. But I see stuff from agencies, and they, at the very last minute, they say something, have you got a woman director or a black director or a director in a wheelchair? And it's all too late, and it's all ad hoc, and it's a mishmash. And what I've said to agencies and to clients to some extent is, you all need to have the same policy, and you need to publish that policy as to what you expect from a production company you're working with, so that everybody knows, when I engage with you, this is what you're going to expect and put forward. Because all this sort of last minute thinking, put somebody in, it just doesn't work. And so at the moment it's incoherent. And so there's a huge amount of work to do to change what is positive thoughts into positive action.
So just to follow up from what you said, Steve, is I spent all of last year as the chair of the Subcommittee for Diversity for the Aicp, and we had a whole load of roundtables with various different agencies, and they were passing the buck, saying that a lot of the decisions come from the client, and then when you talk to the clients, a lot of the decision comes from the agency, and ultimately, apart from and we created these best practice guidelines, we went all up and down. But ultimately, I think it really is about money. And I don't think it's a PowerPoint presentation. It's just, you say, there was this article published in Ad Age last week about all of these different brands that want to increase their spending, with minority vendors and talent. But it's really like, if you have a product, again, to go back to what's happened with the Super Bowl, if there's truly a commitment for diversity, then take that money, knowing that director or edit or whatever will be, supported by the best in the business, and give them the money and put them on the biggest stage in order to then, get more work and build up their thing. So for me, when I'm having these conversations with agencies and they're like, well, we want to put together a plan. I'm like, it really is about money. I've seen jobs awarded for the most stupid reasons. So why can't we just award jobs based on actually increasing the amount of people that, or directly, that do these projects? You know what I mean? That's kind of my frustration. It's like, can we get away from PowerPoints and everything else and just take your hard-earned money and hire diversely?
Mike, let's bring you in at this point. Obviously, your perspective is slightly different. I think you have worked in the advertising industry, but your experience is mainly in feature films, which is similarly dominated by white men. How do you account for that through your experience in the business? How meritocratic do you feel the business is? And if you do feel that that change is required, what would you suggest?
It's very complicated, I think. I mean, I came into filmmaking after I had a career as a musician and a composer first. So I came in, with that sort of wide-eyed and full of enthusiasm as a kind of independent, experimental filmmaker. That's what I did. That's what I wanted to do. That's what I still want to do. And then I had the good or bad fortune to have a kind of minor hit that took me to America. I got an agent, did the whole thing, ended up in the studio system, which was about 15 years. It was a kind of horrific learning curve with some success, but a lot of failure. However, I did use my time to kind of observe how the industry works. And the answer is it works appallingly badly. It is the most financially inefficient system you can possibly imagine. It's totally based on clubs. It's totally based on who you know and who you have breakfast with. And I did a series about 20 years ago called Hollywood Conversations. I interviewed 25 people in Hollywood. One of them was Bruckheimer, and he kept correcting me when he said, Mike, it's called the film business. It's called show business. It's somebody else's money. And the thing is, this idea of creativity, trying to kind of exist in that world, that's the first point I would make, has always been a huge problem. What was immediately apparent was how singularly undiverse it was, like there were virtually no women at all. And that was all based on the idea that the equipment was so heavy that women couldn't carry it, going back to the dawn of cinema. And of course, it was very heavy. But then we had the digital revolution, and there was a moment of absolute terror where everybody thought, God, my job is I'm screwed. My second home, the 3 cars, the mistress, whatever, Hollywood was literally quaking with fear. So what they did very quickly was reinvent very heavy digital equipment so that they could justify having the big fat man to carry it again, and that's way too heavy. In terms of color and ethnicity, always, where do you begin? Horrifically racist. I did a film called One Night Stand, replaced Nicolas Cage with Wesley Snipes, and the leading actress with a Chinese actress. And it was like, it was a learning curve, man. The reviews came out and they were offensive in many cases. And somebody pointed out they're offensive because they felt Wesley Snipes was way too arrogant for that character. Had it been Nick Cage or Sean Penn or somebody, they wouldn't have blinked an eye. It would have been part of the DNA of the character. So that's a whole horrific can of worms. Right now, we also have a crisis, which is post Me Too and everything that's happened. Cinema is on its knees. The film industry is going down the toilet very quickly, and Netflix is basically taking over. So this kind of panic, a combination of panic for your welfare, for your survival, and secondly, among young filmmakers, such confusion about their identity, what they're supposed to be, how political they're supposed to be, what kind of a story they have to tell, and all of that. I see chaos, and I see really insecure young filmmakers who actually are often very scared. In terms of like people like me bitching about, we can't even get a job now because I'm not, either gay or whatever. as somebody pointed out the other day, I think it was a line in White Lotus or something. It's not your turn. It's not your turn to eat at the table. I thought that was fair enough. Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Shut up. But at the same time, the other observations I think are valid, and I'm kind of fascinated by the world of visual creativity because it's such a mess right now, and it's a combination of capitalistic mess, the equipment mess, the identity mess. It'll settle down, what I'm hoping is that rather than trying to just deal with that existing system, it's kind of done. It's out of date, like politics. It's out of date, and we actually do need to come up with something radically different that would then have the appropriate spaces for everybody. Everybody should be working. It's crazy.
But that's the terror, isn't it? Like, as you said before, when the digital revolution started, it was the prospect of a kind of more democratic form of filmmaking that persuades the people with capital to re-exert their control. So
yeah, but I mean, I give an example of the studio mindset. I remember going in for a pitch meeting on a Brad Pitt project, and it was so low budget in the script. It should have been shot on 16mm in someone's apartment. And I can't remember the studio. It was one of the big ones. And I said, what's the budget? And they said, like 25 million. I went, what? And they said, not enough. And I went, I was thinking more like 3, And they all looked at each other and said, Mike, there's no problem with the budget. It's fixed. Next question, So this kind of protectionism, going back to what, Eleanor Sophie said, it is about money. Ultimately, it is about money, and people will always pass the buck and blame somebody else. It's never their problem. Never.
Kirsten, given that, as Sophie and Mike have both pointed out, it's ultimately about the money. How and I think Mike raises a good point about the intrusion really of creativity into what is a business arrangement, if you know what I mean. How do we break through that? And also, can I also sort of ask you 2 questions in one? Mike also mentioned that we have some new, very big players in this marketplace, in the broader marketplace outside of advertising, particularly in the guise of Netflix, Amazon, Apple, Disney, and so on. Are you involved with talking to those companies as well? And do you think there's a chance of a better approach on television than we've seen in advertising and in film?
There's a lot to unpack there with those questions. I think that what both Mike and Sophie said about it's about money and it's a business are really important for us to look at in actually making more progress, because in advertising, in all entertainment, whether it's film or TV, it is a business. And we all know as creatives that we're not in this business as a charity. We're not in it to lose money. So any creator, I don't care how amazing, like Mr. Figgis is, every creator has to learn about building their own brand and being in a business. But I think ultimately it's the people that have the money and that are ultimately responsible for the projects that have the most power to make a change in what everyone else is doing. From advertising agencies to production companies, when someone says you're only going to get this budget if you allocate X amount of dollars towards, diverse crews, have a certain amount of percentage of diverse filmmakers, create apprenticeship programs. Our industry is an amazing apprenticeship business. We've tried to talk to unions and guilds about the most amazing way to get in the door to be in the grip and electric department or in the sound department is to be able to apprentice and have people that are experienced in that show younger people how to learn a trade. And those positions and those opportunities are as important, if not more important, than how many directors are doing Super Bowl commercials. And I think if we look at the industry as a whole, instead of just looking at, like Sophie said, you can turn on any Netflix show, you can turn on any advertising right now and see a ton of people of color. because that was the first step. People mandated, clients mandated it, studios mandated it. You know, we have to see these people. We're watching people boycotting and stuff like that. It has to be done. So we have to look at the entire business and how people can start to say, it's not okay to walk into a room or look at a panel and only have one person of color on it. It's just not okay. People have to stand up and say no, and then let us figure out how to actually make that happen.
Yeah, and just bringing you to the question about television, are you sensing a better approach if you're involved with those companies? If you're not, then say that. But if you're involved with those companies, are you sensing a better approach?
I mean, look, we do a lot of documentaries, a lot of unscripted right now. I think that there are conversations, but I also think that it's not as much of a specific, like, oh, we want creators that are of color or female creators. They're looking for stories that are relating to an audience that is now asking for more stories and more, you know, you're starting to see success of filmmakers and shows like Insecure and, you know, directors of color coming into these shows, and the audiences are loving them. That's the business. When you start listening to what the audience wants, the business is going to respond to that. So I think that I see more than specifics like you need to have a Black person or a female in a bid pool, because we're not really pitching shows that way.
Yes, I mean, Sophie, let me put this to you. I think that potentially part of the problem is discussions like these. Is that that we as an industry are continually framing the idea of diversity inclusion as a favor that we as white stakeholders, as white male stakeholders in particular, are doing for women and people of color. You know, that we ought to be better about it. That focuses on it in a very negative way, and it implies that essentially we're diluting the creativity in order to achieve a social good. But surely the message from you and from other people who are advocating for women and Black filmmakers, it's about missed opportunity and the fact that the storytelling isn't diverse, not that the people who are telling the stories isn't.
It does feel a lot of the time like it is a favor, like, oh, and like you'll see, you know, agencies and brands. Like I had a call with a brand who was like, we just got someone on for this. It was a huge car brand. We just got someone on of color. Like, look at us. And he was really excited about it that they had done that. But I just really want to get to the point where we're not having these panels anymore, and it doesn't seem like some weird favor or you're getting a pat on the back because you've increased your, spending by another two. I mean, in this Ad Age article, this brand literally said, we're going to increase by another 2%. I was just like, what? This is such BS. It doesn't make any sense. Like 2% doesn't move the needle at all. It's just a joke. It's just to tell your stakeholders and your shareholders that, look, we're trying to participate. What we're doing the least we can do. But we really do need radical change. And you and I, we've spoken about this a lot, Jason, is like when George Floyd's death happened, people were really like ready to do stuff. And the more and more time has gone on, the more it's on the back burner that, people have taken down the black boxes, they're not really, having internal conversations or doing anything. So yeah, it feels like a favor. And I think it feels that, and also just going back to it too, it's also this perception. There's a lot of big directors that are super talented. I mean, I represented a Black director, a huge feature guy, could not get commercials to save his life. I mean, I just couldn't even believe it. Like, he gets $200 million to do a feature, but can't get like $1 million to do a commercial because he's not seen as a safe option. So I think we need to move away from it feeling like a favor and extended some breadcrumbs, to our Black brothers and sisters and people of color, creatives, and more to do with actually looking at their talent. You know,
Mike,
and seeing
can I get your take on that? That idea. Now, you've been involved in the film industry for a very long time, and I think it would be fair to suggest that you were perhaps part of, although forgive me if I'm making an assumption, the first encroachment, the first sort of allowance of people in the sense that that originally filmmaking was very much the domain of the sort of, it was controlled by very posh people. And so on and so forth. And people, I think you're from the Northeast, and in a sense, you would have been a diverse choice once upon a time. So having been through that, what's your take in terms of that? Because I mean, you know, I know it predates you, but you know, you look at the cinema of the 1960s in Britain, and it was absolutely led by working class filmmakers. There was a revolution of sorts. And it was very creative, wasn't it? So that surely has to be the opportunity here.
Yeah, I mean, there's two separate things. One is commercials, and one is, let's say, feature films. They are very different in the sense that commercials are commercial, full stop. I mean, their commercials are designed to sell things. That's what it says on the box. That's what they do. Feature films have a kind of artistic pretension, let's say. I was thinking when actually, Sophie, when you were talking, because I started as a musician, as a jazz musician, so I'm kind of obsessed with jazz, and my dad was, so I'm a kind of sort of boring encyclopedia of the jazz history of jazz, you know. And when I first started working in America, it was fascinating for me. It was like in the good and the bad, because there was no audience, and certainly there was not a black audience for jazz, you know. And I remember interviewing B.B. King, who was personally thanking the British white musicians for putting him back on the map, because he said, I didn't have an audience back in the States. Now, the reason he didn't have an audience was there were no venues, and there was not appropriate, and the way that the record industry was run was not geared towards actually attracting the appropriate audience. So my point is about audience and about stories. So I obviously know more about feature films than I do about commercials, even though I've done some. But I would say that one of the big problems is story. So, like, stories are crap right now. They're algorithmic, they are predictable, and they're not really hitting the heart of specific audiences. I mean, the whole point about cinema and the digital revolution was suddenly this was an opportunity where everybody could have their own cinema. Everybody, but no, everybody flocks towards that one little doorway, which is called, I mean, you mentioned your director was earning 200 million. Wow, lucky man, you know. Maybe he doesn't need a commercial, you know. We have to be honest. You know, you can make a lot of money in this business, and it's very hard to separate it, to be truthful about, are you an artist, or you just want to be rich, you know? Or you want both? Well, of course we want both, you know. So my take on it is stories are crap, and we need a revolution in storytelling in order to identify. You've got to hit the right audience. Once you have an audience, so if you go back to jazz, look at blues and look at rock and roll and look at, let's say, hardcore blues, as opposed to the intellectual idea of jazz, John Coltrane and all of that. Blues had a big audience. And in the same way, hip hop has a huge audience, you know, like massive audience. So every genre has its specific audiences, and there's plenty of them out there. And, you know, we don't have to all make the same thing or at the same time. So what the industry needs to do is not just diversify, it needs to expand and actually start to identify. That's what, go back to what I said. It's so badly organized. It's so hopelessly inefficient. If they were manufacturing cars, they would have gone out of business like 50 years ago, you know. It's appalling, because it's about money. It's about a tight group of guys mainly holding on to that money and that, you know, and stopping progress.
Mike, I would have to challenge your idea that the stories are poor at the moment. I think they are, if you look in particular directions. I think the sort of top end of cinema is terrible at the moment. Truly, truly awful. It's just become about spectacle and so on. But it isn't an exaggeration when people talk about a golden era of television. The writing in television is absolutely fantastic if you're looking in the right direction.
It's got better. And I tell you, my theory is that all the smart guys who are writing smart, bad movies for Hollywood actually have graduated to television, and they're doing smart, bad television. and it's a kind of conjuring trick. There is good stuff, but most of it is just very well made crap.
Oh,
Very
well, I mean,
formulaic,
to
super
be
smart.
fair, at any given time, most of it's well made crap. But we're talking about there is a seam of really good stuff, and I think it rather proves the point, because I think the creative talent within the television pool is more diverse. You do have Phoebe Waller-Bridge and I'm forgetting her name, but the woman who is Issa Rae, who runs Insecure and so on. You've got these very talented women who are being given an opportunity in television that are not being given elsewhere, and I think that's where you're getting the kind of the improvement. Which, Steve, let's bring you in at this point, because that wasn't really a question. But do you? But obviously, you're concerned almost wholly with advertising. But do you perceive that it's important to sell this as a positive change, as an opportunity, rather than a sort of a sort of act of social kindness?
I entirely agree it is, although I don't think it matters what someone's motivation for making this change is, as long as they're actually making it. Of course, we can see that when you're advertising to a diverse audience, that to have people who can tell stories the diverse audience relates to is going to make the advertising better. And having diverse thoughts and thinking in a room will lead to better ideas rather than stale ideas. But it's that real commitment, I think, to make change that can come from anywhere. And I think I was going to mention, how we affect change. I think Kirsten talked about measurable change. And clearly, you've got to have targets, and you've got to try and hit those targets, and you've got to be determined to put the work in. And I was going to mention Juliet Lath, who of course runs Pretty Bird here, as an example of that, because she ensures that she has a diverse crew on her set in terms of race, in terms of gender, I think in terms of sexuality. And it's often the case that a producer at her place will say, I'm sorry, I can't get those people. The shoot's in 2 days. I need to use these people. And she says, that's not good enough. Go back and try again until you've achieved it. And it takes that level of determination and work by a production company, by an agency, by a client, and not accepting being fobbed off or excuses, even those excuses might be real, that you're under real pressure and you want to work with somebody new. It takes that level of commitment. And if everyone did that, we would achieve change much more quickly than we're currently progressing towards.
Let's talk about money for a minute. Graham Tyler of Moore Kingston Smith drew my attention to to an article which was published in the American trade press about the fact that the women who are attached to money-making features has actually come down the way. As Sophie alluded to, I think we saw fewer women directing commercials. Super Bowl is a good metric. There's around it's always worth mentioning for the audience that doesn't know this, there's around 75 new commercials each time at the Super Bowl. And for a lot of those brands, that's their biggest budget of the year. So it's a real it's a real opportunity, a real yardstick of how we're getting on. And Sophie's numbers were about right. And actually it's down on previous years, which really, it does make you question the value of the various initiatives. Free the Bid, I don't think it's worked. And I think it's time to be honest about that. Our own initiative, Sisterhood, it hasn't worked. It's time to be honest about that and reappraise and find a new approach. But in terms of money, I'm led to believe by something Graham sent me, there may be a bit of a differential on the two different sides of the Atlantic. Kirsten, I don't know, with obviously you've got your London offshoot, perhaps you're in a good position to address this, but is there pay equity is pay equity better in Europe than it is in the United States? And if so, why?
You mean pay equity with director salaries?
I believe so.
I mean, I only know what we do, so...
Sorry, to be clear, obviously here we're still on the diversity question, so I mean differentials between,
between like female directors rates and male director rates. I mean, honestly, and thank you, Steve, for giving my partner Juliet a shout out. We will only handle it as everyone makes the same. I think the way that directors' rates work are based on experience and based on what the project is. So we might look at it, but we wouldn't put up a director and say, well, her rate is less. And I think that most of the agencies are savvy enough to not call that out and say she should charge a lower rate, because there is a window of industry standard, I think, for commercials now. So we would definitely call that out if we ever heard it, and we haven't.
Right. I feel that we're a little pushed for time, but I'm going to bring Mike in on that question, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, Kirsten. I mean, in my experience in the past was they always looked at your last gig, and said, okay, and maybe, certainly within the film system, you either got a bump, or if you hadn't worked for a while, you fell down the ladder quite a bit. Isn't that not the same in the commercials industry?
I mean, it's Mike. It's so much different because the way that it's tied to profit, it's tied to the success of the project, the way that people share in back end. There's a lot more chance of unequal distribution on the film and TV side. In commercials, like right now, the rates are pretty standard. So it would be really hard to say, so and so is charging $20,000 a day in the US for a director's rate, but your female director is charging $20,000. She needs to bring that rate down. It's just, we can't, people aren't going to call that kind of stuff out. It's more where it's just people bringing us into the mix. Like Sophie said, we're spending thousands and thousands of dollars pitching and doing treatments, putting up directors that we believe, like my whole reputation is on building talent. If I put up a director that I think is appropriate and the creatives love their treatment, you can guarantee that we're going to deliver that spot. But what's happening is, and this Super Bowl is a perfect example, I think we bid 10 spots, lost 9 of them, all with directors of color, and all because they didn't have a track record, or so-and-so's the Super Bowl king, and blah, blah, blah. But we spent all the money and did all the work to do that. And in the end, it wasn't about the budget or the director's rate. It was just this, they don't have a track record.
Actually, I just want to do one last thing. I want to bring Steve in on this issue because I want to ask a very direct question. Do you think the triple bid itself has a structural problem that is generating the cost to Kirsten and other and Sophie and other people who own companies, that it's essentially unfair? It directs the agencies towards a box ticking exercise, and it's perhaps time to review it?
I think the triple bid generally is a sound exercise. I think you have to look at why people aren't being chosen. And there are some reasons for that aren't just racism. And we, like any problem, we have to understand it very well to fix it. If you're a creative, or say junior creative, you've written a script that at last some of the top directors in the world would look at, and your career, future career, probably depends on that ad becoming an award winner. You're desperate for whoever that person is to do the ad. And so those are pressures on them. And so the only way that can only really be released by the advertiser saying, no, we don't want to go down that route. We want to draw from a different population you've been to in the past. Otherwise, the pressure on everybody within it is just to keep their job, progress their career, make money. They're stuck in the same system, really, and the clients have to somehow release people from that.
Yeah, we definitely need to make some changes. Thank you, all of you. My hope for 2022 is that whilst it's marvellous, absolutely marvellous to see so many Black people participating in commercials, it does feel at times as though the rationale behind it is if we keep them all on that side of the camera, then we can keep this side of the camera to ourselves, and it ought to end. Thank you very much to each of you.
Welcome, everybody, to the Great Martech Hack. Words like great and Martech are probably easier to understand. The word hack is often has negative connotations, but in this instance, this really is about giving you, the audience and listeners, a shortcut, ways in which, by listening to this panel and listening to this session, you'll have ideas and where you can take action for your business. With me today, I've got an incredible panel. We've been very, very thankful for their time and their attention. I'm going to start with Laura Merton. Laura is with Hogarth Worldwide and is a Martech solutions architect. Hogarth, of course, owned by the biggest advertising business in the world, WPP. I think there were $17 billion in revenue last year. So when they do something, I think people really sit up and take notice. So we'll come back to Laura in a moment for an intro from Laura, who'll tell you all about herself. Joining Laura is Paola Marinoni. Paola is an ex-YouTuber and Googler, but for this instance is the CEO and founder of Buzz My Videos, which is a MarTech business and very much at the forefront of helping brands and helping agencies and helping media really get the best out of MarTech. And then also joining Laura and Paola is Carlos Doughty. Carlos is the founder of the MarTech Alliance, which are an industry group which represent thousands of various stakeholders in MarTech all around the world. And not only is he the CEO and founder of the MarTech Alliance, but he's also a course instructor. And I'm sure he'll be sharing ideas with us and what's actually happening, in the MarTech space. And that's probably the best place to start it. So, Carlos, you and I had the pleasure of working together during 2020 on producing the MarTech report, which we've done. More Kingston Smith, More Global has done in association with the MarTech Alliance. Look, what's going on out there? What's driving MarTech to such great success at the moment?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. Really excited for this session. Look, it's been fun working with you. I think MarTech's having a moment, a particularly hot moment. It was, I suppose, cool for a bunch of nerds for some time, and it's hit a little bit of an inflection point. If I was to summarize where and how we got here, the world went digital overnight, quite literally. Obviously, everyone knows what happened in the pandemic. That had massive ramifications for all of us and how we operate. And instantly, we had to move, whether it was how people buy, how we work, how we engage. We had to move to a digital world at its most extreme. And at the core of that is you need to think about digital transformation. And at the core of digital transformation, for me, is MarTech, a series of different tools, over 10,000 available to help you get there. And so with the pandemic, with the acceleration, with the need for change, with the need for adapt or die, people leaned in heavily for the investments, for the areas of MarTech where perhaps once upon a time they were taking 3 months, 6 months or 12 months. Decisions were being made like that instantly. Let's go, let's invest, let's move quickly because we have to. And so MarTech's gone from this sort of word that some marketers understood, some marketers invested in heavily, to front and center. And I think that's probably one of the first things we found working with you in the report was nearly 1 in 4 pounds being spent on MarTech. So it's a real thing. It's a real discipline. It's a core marketing discipline that needs to be treated as such. It's more than a moment. It's making change, and it's front and center.
And Laura, 8 years ago, I had never come across the word MarTech, and now I'm talking to a MarTech solutions architect. What's going on? You're a Hogarth agency, and what are agencies doing about MarTech, and why is this such a big thing for you?
Yeah, so it's interesting actually. I was previously heading up MarTech in-house, and so I've just moved over to Hogarth, and Hogarth itself is content production at its core. So we tend to do production at scale. And I think as we've seen organizations move to personalization at scale, as we've seen across the industry, that being a kind of common theme, the need and the appetite for heaps of content to kind of nurture that personalization has grown. And I think exactly as Carlos said, the need for transformation to support that personalization has grown too. And actually the department I work in, it is marketing transformation. And I was brought in to kind of help support that growing hunger, that need for organizations to continue to transform. And to, at the heart of that is MarTech. So my role is interesting actually, because I'm looking at either, supporting with designing a solution to help them with their transformation, or actually looking at their existing architecture and going, why is this not delivering what they need it to do? It's some of it's about, you use the term hack. Some of it's about doing that kind of growth hacking piece where you actually go, you've got all the core components, but they're probably just not plumbed right. And actually, now where we're seeing teams in-house being streamlined, slimmed down, budgets are cut, there's not enough talent in the market, agencies like ours are coming in to help kind of support those teams in kind of automating what already exists, fine-tuning it, streamlining it, really getting the most out of those investments that have been made. And the kind of clients that we're working with, they are large global enterprises that possibly have put off doing these transformations for some time, or are kind of anchored to some legacy technology that they've finally now gone, look, we need to do a full kind of transformation of this for us to really stay ahead of the market. So
I'm glad you brought up the legacy technology, because we're going to come back to that later on in the session. And but just staying with this and getting through these round of intros, Paola Marinoni, you've been running Buzz My Videos now for 10 years. So, well, when did it feel right for you to decide that you're a part of this MarTech wave of acceleration and transformation? When did that happen?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me here. It's very much of an honor, and very interested to hear from the other panelists as well. So what I saw in the last 10 years, and actually started at Google in 2006, when Google was not a big thing back then, and YouTube in 2009. And when we started with Buzz My Videos in 2011, we were creating technology mainly for the YouTubers, which were, to be honest, at that time, the only ones getting it. And then what we saw, especially in the last couple of years, like from the year before the pandemic, really 2-3 years, we actually started having calls from big like global publishers or like global brands, and they were asking us to actually use the technology to grow organically on YouTube and use that from a MarTech perspective. So we were like, okay, wait a second. We never thought we were this thing. And then it was actually the market asking for that. And what we noticed was the need was there. It was not mature enough at the very beginning when we started the business. It was really mature for creators, for YouTubers, because they were really getting the platform, the audience, how to build content, how to market it, with no budget, basically. But and then there was a lot of interest from whoever was cutting edge, like 2-3 years ago, and then it was like a big boom, like everybody needs to do something. And
was this pandemic? Was pandemic driven? Was it before the pandemic?
So that started before the pandemic, and then the pandemic definitely accelerated it, because then at the beginning, when we started building more of the business line for brands and agencies and platforms and publishers, we were really testing the market with very big names, because they asked us mainly. It was like really inbound. Then when we were going outbound, people were like, oh, that's interesting. It's nice to have. I don't really understand it very much. And we were like, okay, fine. And then the pandemic was like, okay, people were listening. So the status quo was over. That's it. People were really curious to see whatever were the potential solutions and anything to actually get to the customers, and making sure that they were really leveraging everything they had. So the pandemic was a big accelerator, especially in understanding there was an opportunity there in other solutions of any kind of solutions. And that definitely accelerated the moving towards the MarTech space.
And Laura, I'm just back to you. You must have seen huge, increases in MarTech spend, during the pandemic. You talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, we're still seeing it. I think, I think there's a couple of big trends. I saw a lot of organizations moving, commerce. I think that's a clear standout for us, is that a lot of organizations have been moving to direct to consumer. So away from sort of combined marketplace to bringing, trying to strengthen their brand presence by driving individuals, and brands, that consumer products that you probably wouldn't expect people to be going straight to the individual to buy from. I think we're seeing a greater trend in that. But yeah, I think that a lot of organizations, they're investing now, not realizing that it's a huge undertaking, and that the fact that it's going to take a long time to get these systems in place and really kind of running at full capacity as well. And we're still seeing that.
Back to your earlier point, though, I mean, how much of that is about trying to deal with the what did you call it, the legacy technology? I mean,
yeah.
Are you seeing that as being a real factor?
With some clients, I think it's a bit of a mix. I think we're seeing either, if I take, for example, personalization, some of that's individual, organizations that have got sort of, legacy CMSs and they're needing to upgrade to DXPs. And part of that issue is they're going, okay, well, we want to get a DXP in place. That seems simple enough, but actually it's about, how do you deliver that content? And how do you make sure that is sort of embedded within the rest of your ecosystem? And it's all very well sort of taking, replacing that kind of web presence layer without maybe considering things like your digital asset management tool. So if they've not got that in place, it actually makes a lot of it harder to kind of automate. And that's where a lot of these organizations are really needing to kind of focus on, is that capability to automate, to streamline, to really drive efficiencies because of the lack of maybe team size or capacity in-house to run these projects and to do their day-to-day jobs. So,
and I remember when I know because you contributed to the MarTech report with myself and Carlos last year, and there was a lovely quote from you which said that some marketers are dealing with more than 40 different pieces of different MarTech tools at the moment. That's an extraordinary number.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you think of a sort of typical MarTech stack, everyone, I'm sure, who's into MarTech has seen that MarTech landscape, and, to be able to manage not just your kind of core platforms, but it's all the additional tools and apps that sit alongside that to just deliver, a single campaign and to really get that ecosystem running smoothly. And actually, that's where I think we're, we talk about some of the outputs of that report were, the trend of organizations trying to build their MarTech in-house teams. And for us, from an agency side, I think it's interesting thinking about what our position is there in the market. But actually, we're still seeing a lot of clients come to us to help kind of bolster those teams and to almost kickstart a lot of the projects. So, you've got these in-house MarTech teams running, their day-to-day campaigns, supporting with in-house marketers, getting them trained up to use the systems, making sure that they're fine-tuning what's already in place. And then, if you want to do another initiative on top of that, there's just not enough bandwidth for the teams. So that's where we're coming in. We're kind of designing automations. We're helping with large scale configurations. And then we're working collaboratively with the teams to then sort of knowledge share, hand that back over to them and let them run with the projects. So it's definitely an interesting time in the agency world.
I bet, and we'll be talking about the agency world a bit more in a moment. Carlos, over to you. 10,000 vendors in the MarTech space now? Seriously?
Yeah, it's a bit crazy. At the same time, you could say there's 100. And so there's the long tail. There's definitely the long tail. There's kind of your core MarTech stack, what do you really need to operate? And then there's loads of amazing innovation, but some of these are plug and play, really cheap, really simple. It's an app that sits on top of my CRM or my CDP or whatever else it might be.
Yeah.
I think it's important to remember the point of that landscape and the point of that 10,000. I don't think Scott Brinker ever went, this is helpful. This is how you go and find your marketing stack. I think it's really a PR piece. It's about demonstrating the innovation in the space, the growth, and it serves that beautifully. We see that, we recognize it's growing fast, there's loads of options, and we recognize there's some challenges with selecting the right tech. What's more interesting and more helpful is to look at the categories within that. So there's 49 categories. Remove those, understand the use cases for which they deliver something of value, and then get into, is it X, Y, and Z? Is it purple? Is it green? Is it blue? Not here's 10,000 pieces. I think there's some interesting times ahead. I think one thing we've seen the last 12 months has been a fair amount of acquisition. And I think sort of the major players, is there going to be space for more innovation, or are we going to see continued acquisition? I think I'll give an example. Adobe, Adobe's been particularly big in acquisitions. It acquired Workfront. Some time ago now acquired Marketo. I think we'll probably see more of those major players, the major marketing clouds, acquire significant solutions. And I think the CDP space in particular, I think a couple of things. CDPs are booming, incredibly hot right now, more data than ever. Brilliant, great. However, you've got to use it intelligently. That's where a CDP comes in. And I think there's a few of the marketing clouds which are still not there with their CDP solution. And so it wouldn't surprise me to take some of the powerful, independent, pure play CDPs and see them swallowed up by some of the big boys.
Does that not in itself create more worry and concern for organizations who want to invest in MarTech, that if they feel it's such an ever-changing landscape, is there not a tendency then for them to, want to sit on their hands a little bit and wait until, all this M&A activity has been exhausted, and then that's when they should be investing more? What would be your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point. Yeah, you'd love to future-proof, but I don't think there is such a thing. I think the other thing is, from the point of acquisition, you're talking about 2 or 3 years maybe for full integration. So even if you waited for the day they sign the dotted line and Slack's part of Salesforce or Workfront's part of Adobe, it's going to be some time until it's fully integrated. And I don't think anyone's got time now. I think the opportunity is there. And so Laura mentioned D2C. I think it's particularly interesting in that space. What you've seen is, with great MarTech, you can move quickly. And with great MarTech and automation, potentially you don't need as big a team. And so if you don't adapt, if you don't move, if you don't invest and have the right tech in place, you risk being overtaken by a smaller player. Particularly in the D2C space, I think has been interesting, where if you're taking too long, if you're thinking too much, you're probably going to fall behind. And especially because of the pandemic, and especially with the accelerated change that we've seen.
Well, I think this really supports the figures supported too, don't they? I mean, Luma, reported a 214% increase in M&A activity, and you mentioned some of the big names, Adobe and Twilio, for example, acquiring ZipWhip, Intuit acquiring Mailchimp, and even it's not just M&A; it's also funding as well. Sitecore, I think, were referred to in the MarTech report as well, that they broke all records last year when they onboarded over $1 billion in fresh funding. And Laura, back to you on the agency side. I mean, it must be.
Sorry, Damien. May I just jump in 1 second? The 10,000.
Please, go for it. Yeah.
Thank you. Because I think the question you were asking, Carlos, is very interesting. On the 10,000, is that too much? What's going to happen? And there is one thing that I noticed very much working in this space, is that because of most of the times there is a lot of interest in anything that is the top tier, so the big household names, and sometimes like MarTech is really key and pivotal for everything that is small and medium businesses. There's a huge opportunity there, and that's why as well a lot of MarTech is gonna increase massively. So I don't think that the 10,000 is gonna go down. It's probably gonna go up. In this year for sure, and next year again, and then consolidation is going to happen, that's for sure. But I think that's the fact that now the the paradigm, so that the way that everybody's doing business is changing. So it's not changed completely because it's not 0 to 1, but it's changing. Anything that is small and medium business now has a huge opportunity to actually grow massively. So that's never been easier for them to actually make business compared to bigger companies. So, and MarTech serves as well those kind of companies, which is really a big opportunity, and it's really about timing. So I think that's going to be interesting to see what the numbers is going to be in 1 year or two, because with high marginality and high efficiency and the huge demand, that 10,000, I'm betting is probably going to be 20,000 in 12 to 18 months, because there's a huge opportunity from an economical point of view.
I think it's certainly going to be interesting, Paola, to see how the growth changes. And I mean, I've stopped trying to second guess, how many more companies, we'll see in the MarTech space. And but moving just back into the agency world again, Laura. I mean, there's been agencies, of course, have been very busy as well on the M&A front too, haven't they? I mean, Dentsu acquiring Merkle, and Ogilvy have done several acquisitions, including Pennywise and Who Digital. WPP, Hogarth. I mean, what? How are you seeing the world from an M&A standpoint, from a MarTech perspective?
I mean, I think from our side, I mean, so I've been at Hogarth now for sort of, I think about 7 to 8 months. I mean, WPP, obviously, huge organization. I mean, I'm still learning about the different agencies that are a part of it and the ones that it continues to acquire. I think the trends from an acquisition point of view, I think, data huge, and whether that be from a kind of sort of insights, research point of view, or indeed more down the route of sort of CDPs, AI, ML, etc. From our point of view, when we're looking at how we, grow, I think there's that continuous question of whether you organically grow or whether you buy in the talent to support clients. If for example, you see a huge spike in demand and we need to support those clients, then that's certainly an option for us, and it's probably the quickest option as well.
But Laura, also speaking as an agency, does this move towards in-housing by advertisers and brands, does that not concern you? I mean, if they're moving their MarTech skills and capabilities, I mean, where would this leave agencies in the future?
So I still think there's a strong need for agencies. I mean, interestingly, as I mentioned at the beginning, so I headed up marketing technology teams in-house before I moved agency side, and with all the will in the world, we still needed agency support. And generally, that was for either two things. It was a capacity issue. So as I mentioned before, teams. I don't think there's anybody out there, any organization where they've got teams or individuals who are having leisurely days where they're, sat twiddling their thumbs, wondering what to do next. We know from the pandemic that there is a huge burnout. People are working flat out, and there's a skill shortage. So we've got organizations where we've got people who are hugely overworked, where we don't have enough talent to support the growing need for technology, for automation. And I think that's definitely where agencies are going to come in to support. They're going to come in for these individual projects. They're going to come in to kickstart, to kind of overhaul something, to support with automation, to implement, to configure. They might even bring sort of the strategic lens that isn't necessarily in the organization as it stands. And I think the other thing that we'll bring is that view of the landscape, or agencies. They're in a unique position where they're actually working with a huge, varied number of clients, and they're understanding, what are the pitfalls, what are the trends, what are the, opportunities to be made, and they're taking that to their clients. So I think there's definitely there's still a place for agencies,
okay.
And I actually think that's probably going to grow.
Okay, and I like the two key words there to focus on. So it's about, from an agency standpoint, it's about their capacity to be able to support their clients, and it's also about their own unique perspective being part of the the bigger picture. The skills shortage thing, I knew this was going to come up in the conversation because it really is such a massive area. And in fact, our own CEO at More Global said in the report that MarTech maturity can only be realized when skills and training match the technology. And a lovely segue for you, Carlos, because I'm sure there are lots of people beating a path to your door to get skilled up in MarTech technologies right now. What are you seeing there?
Yes, so two interesting things. One, I think when we look at the report, if we rewind slightly on that piece around MarTech maturity, we tried to look at 4 components, those being planning and strategy, people and teams, platforms, apps and ecosystems, and process and marketing ops. And what stood out was the area where there was the lowest level of maturity, people and teams. It was the need for people to drive maturity that was underbaked. And it's exactly what we see. Here's something that's super interesting that we've seen just in the last 3 months, especially. Lots of agencies coming to us to help train their teams. We've got instances of, we've got 40, 50 brand new consultants specializing in MarTech. We need help training them. It's not that they're not experienced, it's bringing it all together, organizing it, understanding really how can you be strategic about how you manage your MarTech. So we're seeing more demand than ever, especially on the agency side, but also on the brand side. Interestingly as well, we've seen people come on our programs, love it, really like it, take literally the coursework from the programs to their board to get investment. But then they're doing this not just to say we're going to run this independently, but also still working with their professional services teams alongside that, whether that's on a project basis or whether that's we need to fine tune and really go deep on how we get maximum return on time and cash from X piece of technology. So definitely a skill shortage. And I would say I talk a lot to agencies, MarTech vendors and brand side. One of the first things that happens in any call is, by the way, we're recruiting right now. Anybody you can recommend? Anybody you can recommend in this market? And so the bits of feedback I always get are also around, because there's a shortage, we're seeing earnings increase, more and more opportunities. So if you are a MarTech specialist, Laura, for example, you're in a good place right now. You're sought after, and so there's good opportunity. Added to this, we talked a little bit about M&A. Lots of cash flooding MarTech vendors as they look to accelerate their growth. That means they're in a position to offer greater rates as well. So I think we're seeing a little bit of talent wars when it comes to a tech provider being able to offer more than potentially a brand and potentially an agency. So yeah, definitely a booming space, good opportunity, and a shortage of skills.
Okay, and Paolo, I wanted to come on to you with this because we've only got a certain amount of time today, and much as I'd like to chat about all this, we should probably start to move into let's call it the home straight, and this is the hack part of the great MarTech hack. So Paolo, as a MarTech business and as somebody who's been around this space and seen all the changes in MarTech, not just the giving advice to the media industry, but to give advice to all businesses around. What's the one thing that Paula from Buzz My Videos reckons that businesses should be doing right now regarding MarTech?
Well, and just going back to the maturity that you were saying before, and understanding what to do, there is a lot of opportunity from anything that was there before. And there is one thing that I always reckon is completely unknown from most of the marketeers, which is the organic side of video across the board. I mean, YouTube being one of them. There are many different platforms, but anything that is like organic is actually driving you lots of traffic, and it could be like driving you lots of revenue. Like in the future, not just in the present. And that's what I saw by talking to anybody like in the industry. And it's interesting how, for example, YouTube, that has been there forever, like it's 15 years, it's super old now, it's not really a new platform. Knowledge is not there yet, unless it's for advertising spend. And from my experience, I'm really surprised. I mean, I honestly surprised. I mean, from a business perspective, I'm pretty, I see it as with a lot of interest, but I'm super surprised that this has not been leveraged enough. So people look at what we are doing, for example, with video SEO, which is SEO has been basic for 10 years right now. So SEO is like bread and butter. Video SEO is not. So being first number one in Google with your videos from YouTube is like, wow, people are looking at that like, oh, wow, can I do that? Yes, you can. We can do that. And so seeing what you have already in place is brilliant, because there's huge value that you actually can drive for anything you already have. Plus,
Okay,
you then keep investing.
That's your point. Then it's not to just leap out there and assume it has to be something new. Perhaps it's actually take a breath and say, well, like, what have we actually got here in terms of assets, and how do we make the most out of what we have?
Correct. That's phase zero. So you have huge value there already. So why don't you leverage the value you already have, and then read the data, and then start investing in anything new? And that's brilliant. So the combination with Archive and new is the perfect combination. But you don't have to do new stuffs before you actually understand everything else, because you're just losing an opportunity. So it's you can do it. It's absolutely fine, but still there's a lot of value to be taken there.
Okay, and Carlos, does Paola's advice fly in the face of leaping in there and just getting stuck in with MarTech?
No, I think there's a bit of both. I think there's instinctively, I think most people want to go, what are the quick wins? Because the strategy, the big piece is tough. But you can do a bit of both. You can have those projects running concurrently of, here's my quick wins, here's some little bit of optimization, a little bit of improvements where I can see quick return. But Paola's absolutely right. You still need to think very strategically if you want to get maximum return, whether it's on time, cash, the overall realization of your project. If you're not strategic about it and you try and move too fast, I think there's just a balance between over planning or probably more just sort of a classic sizable organization where perhaps it's a little bit too bureaucratic in the decision-making process. So if you can balance out those two, I think you get the best of both.
And so back to the MarTech hack again, Carlos. So what's your words of wisdom for people watching and listening?
Cool. I'll split into three. I would say one is anybody in MarTech, you're sat in a good place right now. Market's booming, so that should be good for your career. If you're sat there, if you've got knowledge, so if your brand sides, I would say double down. MarTech's a real marketing discipline, and you should keep building your knowledge in that space, because you have an opportunity to separate yourself and be that subject matter expert internally. If your agency sides, I think the bits Laura said are so true. There is definitely a place for agencies or consultancies to work in collaboration. I don't think it's a binary decision between in-house versus agency or consultancy. And also the reality between I want to in-house my MarTech versus can I think sometimes there's a bit of a gap between those. So I think agencies are very well placed. I think more and more agencies expand their services in that space. And again, I would say that's a massive opportunity. There's a shortage of talent. There's not a shortage of need. So there's a massive gap in opportunity there. And then vendor side, so from a tech provider's perspective, what I'm seeing and hearing is markets are booming. Markets are booming. It's especially true of a few different areas. DXPs, CDPs, DAMs, commerce, they're the areas I'm hearing most about. There are others, which we talk about in the report as well. I would say the opportunity to really excel in this environment, if you're a MarTech provider, is really refining and understanding digital selling. So the new world, whatever that looks like, is going to have a strong digital selling presence to it. So you need to think more carefully about how you engage, you sell in this environment. I don't think we're going to go back to 100% in person. The days of loads of in-person meetings, we will have some of that, but I don't think to the same degree. So really refining your selling process for this environment. And that could be, for example, embracing opportunities around direct mail, for example, around mixing direct mail with your sales process, that you engage with somebody on a Zoom meeting, you chat about something, you send them a book in the post, really different touch points that are not just face-to-face. Ways to develop that rapport and engagement will be opportunities to really accelerate your deal flow, basically.
Okay, and Laura, last but not least, back to the agency perspective and words of wisdom for our viewers and listeners about the whole MarTech thing.
So I think my words of wisdom are probably partly my own passion area, but I think the opportunity for a lot of organizations now, and actually probably more of a need as well, is to really look at their full architectures and understand where they're being inefficient. I think the opportunity in the future is going to be for those organizations that have learned to streamline and automate, whether that be for commerce, whether that be for personalization. And I think at the heart of that is going to be data. It's going to be understanding what is your data flow. Are you connected? Are your systems properly integrated? Can you, remove that inefficiency for someone having to manually upload or manually approve or, extract and clean and upload somewhere else? I think these are the kind of things where, there's just not going to be the option to do that in the future because, there won't be the capacity in the teams. If you want to also stay competitive, by producing these beautifully connected, personalized customer journeys, I think the data is going to be at the heart of that. And the upside of that is once you are fully connected, you're also going to get the benefits of better understanding those journeys through being able to be then more data driven in your decision making. So my advice would be to either bring in an agency or if it's in-house, really look at your full architecture and understand that data flow.
Well, look, I wish we had more time to continue talking about this. I find it, as you all three of you know, I find it a fascinating subject, and from more global's perspective, we see it as a very, very fundamental part of the whole future, not just of the advertising and marketing sector, but media as a whole. And so we're looking forward to see if what Paola says is going to be the case. We're actually going to have not 10,000 dentists to concern ourselves with, but 25,000, perhaps 30,000. And Carlos, this will obviously mean many, many more members flocking their way to the MarTech Alliance. So, you work in MarTech, so you're in a good place too. And Laura, being part of the biggest agency group in the world, it's been great having your advice. Paola, thank you for joining us. Somebody who's worked with the biggest brands in the space, Google, YouTube, and now running a very, very successful MarTech business. We wish you the very best of luck for that.